It happened! They're leaving. According to our intelligence, Russian security forces and military personnel who flooded into occupied Sevastopol after 2014 are frantically packing their bags. After massive raids by friendly drones and bold Ukrainian announcements, Putin's servicemen are evacuating their families en masse to relatives in Russia.
Next comes the borscht recipe from the freedom-loving Ukrainian bird. Complete air defense collapse, piercing the remnants of the fleet, halting the shadow fleet, total depletion of resources and logistics, a tourism default, an energy desert, a transportation lockdown, and so on.
Even to their godfathers and friends, they whisper in secret, "Run now! Soon the exit from Crimea will be closed and special permits will be introduced for everyone." The occupiers thought they were coming for a hot summer season by the sea, but they had no idea that a completely different kind of heat would come to Crimea. A Ukrainian one. What am I talking about? We started with Crimea and we'll finish with Crimea. The peninsula is one step away from liberation. Things are really heating up. Military and civilians are leaving en masse. Putin's security forces are evacuating entire families. There are massive traffic jams on the Kerch Bridge. Logistics have been destroyed. There's no gasoline, no water, no food. The Ukrainian security service has announced an energy desert. This is how the peninsula is meeting the Ukrainian heat. But this is just the beginning. It will only get worse and harsher from here. Meanwhile, 3 ferries have sunk. Trains are being cancelled and a curfew is being imposed across all of Crimea. Total chaos. How the Ukrainian armed forces are preparing a final blow to completely isolate Crimea, we'll tell you right now. Greetings! This is the channel Ukraine Today, Andrei Silakov, bringing you the hottest news from Crimea. A real apocalypse has begun in occupied Crimea. And these aren't just words, it's a harsh reality for Russians. After massive raids by hundreds of Ukrainian drones, the logistics and infrastructure of the peninsula collapsed like a house of cards. FSB bases in Armyansk are burning brightly, as are fuel storage tanks in Feodosia and infrastructure in occupied Kerch. The occupiers and Russians have finally smelled trouble and have started leaving the peninsula en masse. Absolute chaos reigns at the exit from Crimea. Train services are being cancelled, report crying Muscovite women.
It's just a mess. God, why am I here? I want to go back to Moscow. What are these ruins?
The Crimean Bridge is constantly closed, and at its approaches, massive traffic jams of up to 700 cars are forming, filled with Russians driven mad by fear who suddenly want to go back to Moscow.
There's a 1 million car traffic jam there again.
The most painful blow was dealt to the transport arteries that supplied Putin's army. Ukrainian defense forces brilliantly wiped out 3 ferries at once. Among them was the most important car passenger ferry, Lavrenti, which operated on the strategic Crimea-Caucasus route. Now the occupiers' lifeline has been cut, and all cargo traffic has been forced onto the dangerous land corridor, where our military is already waiting for it.
The vessel provided transportation of cargo vehicles and passengers between the ports of Krasnodar Krai and Crimea. Thus, as a result of successive strikes, key elements of the ferry service across the Kerch Strait, which played an important role in supporting the Crimea-Caucasus route, were hit.
Following the transport collapse, a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe has struck the peninsula. Local Gauleiters Aksionov and Razvozhayev, in a panic, have effectively imposed a state of emergency. The sale of any fuel to civilians has been officially halted. Gasoline is being reserved only for the military and special services. Due to damaged Crimenergo networks, strict power outage schedules have been implemented across the entire peninsula.
I'm walking in Crimea because there's no gasoline. Heading somewhere downtown because there's no electricity at home to charge my devices. That's it. And I'm also worried about the strawberries I froze for winter. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, actually.
Street lighting has been completely shut off. Supermarkets are closing at 8 o'clock p.m.
We vacationed here, I think, 3 years in a row. We've never encountered a situation like this before.
And because the pumping stations were left without power, Crimea was also left completely without fresh water.
My children saw all of this with their own eyes. They heard it themselves. I used to underestimate the whole situation. I wish everyone peaceful skies above their heads. Now my opinion has changed dramatically.
Restrictions were even imposed on food products. Locals are noting a new limit on the purchase of basic goods, such as flour, pasta, and so on.
Look, only 1 bag of flour. Cool. You can only take 1 bag of flour. Well, at least you can take 3 packs of pasta and 3 cans of stew. So rice and buckwheat, 3 packs each. Well, you can get 3 of everything except for flour. And in the end, damn, we filled up an entire cart. Unbelievable.
As they used to say, stability is what we should value. Well, now the peninsula has a new kind of stability.
Stability is extremely important. Look, there's tension and turbulence in the world.
Explosions everywhere, but here we have stability.
Residents of Crimea have been urged to turn off air conditioners and unnecessary electrical appliances. Oleg Kryuchkov, advisor to the Crimean Gauleiter, asked residents of the peninsula to limit their electricity consumption while the accident in the power system is being dealt with. Earlier, part of Crimea was left without power. A schedule of temporary power outages has already been introduced in Sevastopol. Due to the accident, most pumping stations have also lost power and water supply has been cut off in some localities.
The much-touted resort season has turned into a catastrophic default. Hotels are empty, the beaches look like post-apocalyptic movie sets, and the businessmen traitors who took out loans for renovations are going under. And these aren't even my words. All of this is being documented by local vacationers. See for yourself.
So, it's already almost lunchtime, and the beach is empty. Usually, you can't even find a spot here. Now, by lunchtime, just a couple of people have shown up, and in the morning, there were almost none at all. It's just completely empty. Why did this happen? There are plenty of spots in the parking lot, we park easily, and there's no one around. Nothing like this has ever happened here before.
It's gotten to the point where even the Artek children's camp is urgently cancelling sessions, and buses with kids are simply being turned around on the highway.
Just half an hour ago, we got a call from the Ministry of Education of Crimea, and they informed us that this year, absolutely all sessions in children's camps are being cancelled. There are problems with gasoline. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. Today, I don't know, there was a strike on some energy infrastructure, and now there are power outages. Of course, it's not a very pleasant situation, and for now I have no idea what to do about it.
I'll tell you what to do. Unpack your suitcases and forget about Crimea. Because starting this summer, the only ones vacationing on the peninsula will be our drones. This has already been announced by the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces drone systems, Robert Brovdy, known as Madyar. He also apologized to pro-Ukrainian residents of Crimea for the temporary inconveniences and delivered a final verdict to the occupiers.
Ukrainians in the occupied territory, please forgive us in advance for the constant alarms, closed bridges and roads, darkness, lack of peace and quiet, and the stress. Stay away from military facilities and anything flammable. Share memes and just take care of yourselves. The bird works with precision. However, when you chop wood, chips are bound to fly. There is no other way to demilitarize the worm and drive 1 million occupiers off the peninsula. The work will be hard, but we know how to do it. Crimea will be Moscow's downfall. This is the psychological breaking point.
And while strange earthquakes are being recorded on the coast, causing houses to shake, the Ukrainian Air Force makes an intriguing statement. At night, we were observing the Crimean Bridge. The noose around the occupiers is tightening at an incredible speed. The peninsula is rapidly turning into an island cut off from the world, without electricity, without water, without fuel, and with no escape routes. The total roasting of Putin's army is only just beginning. And the final blow, which will forever isolate Crimea from Russia, is just around the corner. A total blackout, dry taps, and empty gas tanks. Due to the precise Ukrainian strikes, the peninsula has plunged into darkness, and after the electricity went out, the water disappeared as well. As the commander of the drone systems forces, Madyar, aptly noted, Crimea has finally turned from a military foothold for Russia into a gigantic problem. Watch the report for all the details of the infrastructural hell facing the occupiers.
Ukrainian forces have successfully struck targets on both sides of the Crimean Bridge. This was announced by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Among the targets attacked were maritime logistics for oil transportation in the Krasnodar region, an oil depot in temporarily occupied Kerch, and Russian army air defense systems. According to Zelensky, units from the Security Service of Ukraine, the Unmanned Systems Forces of the Main Intelligence Directorate, and the Special Operations Forces were involved in the operation.
We have long been advancing the concept of turning Crimea into a kind of trap. Not like a fortress, as they said, that it would be either a logistical route through the Kerch Strait, through Crimea to the south of our mainland, so to speak, but to completely close it off, both from the mainland, meaning Mariupol, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and accordingly all the bridges and ferry crossings, as well as from Kerch. These strikes are essentially creating conditions for the isolation of Crimea and then to strike at all the territories.
The commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Brovdy, clarified, among the affected targets were an oil depot at the oil terminal near Kerch, Kasta 2 Echo 2 radar stations near Kurortnoye, and Niboyu in Kerch. Several gas compressor stations in the settlements of Aromatnoye, Zhuravlevka, and Kliuchi were also hit. All the facilities are located in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea and, according to the SBS, were used in the supply system for Russian troops. Analysts emphasize that the armed forces of Ukraine are striving to clear the peninsula of the Russian military presence.
They are already getting ready to run away. I'll say it straight, there have been such tendencies more than once before. Sometimes they would appear, then the Crimeans and especially the military, meaning the representatives of the occupying forces, would calm down. But now the mood is to flee. Many are already working out routes to return to Russia, those who came there with the occupation, especially civilians. Right now, the mood is already one that leads to panic. All the more so because it is fueled by our strikes and shortages, for example, in energy. There's no gasoline, no oil, nothing at all in any direction from Kerch to Sevastopol. That's the whole of Crimea.
In temporarily occupied Crimea, the sale of fuel at gas stations has been completely stopped in any form. The occupation authorities announced that fuel would only be supplied to state services that ensure the functioning of the peninsula. Such an acute fuel shortage could seriously impact the economy of the aggressor country, experts note.
Russia depends on railways. There is some traffic there, but it depends even more on the highways. And if road logistics are halted or significantly reduced, Russia faces a real collapse. That's why we need to keep pressing. We have already achieved a significant reduction in Russia's oil and gas export revenues, although much still depends on them, overall more than 50%. And now Russia spends 3 times more on the war than it receives from the oil and gas sector and budget revenues.
In addition to the fuel shortage in Crimea, which is temporarily occupied by Russia, partial power outages occurred in several districts of the peninsula due to damage to the electrical grids. As a result, the water supply was also partially cut off. The occupation authorities reported that, in order to relieve the overload on the electrical grids outside of Sevastopol, a schedule of temporary power outages has been introduced in the city.
Due to damage to the electrical grids, there have been partial outages for consumers in the northwestern, central, and southern coastal energy districts. Emergency repair and restoration work is underway. Crimenergo Crimea is quoted as saying, "Realities on Telegram."
Analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War note that Ukrainian strikes on Russian transport and railway infrastructure are already disrupting supply lines for the occupying forces and complicating Russian logistics operations on the left bank of the Kherson region and in Crimea. According to experts, continued fire on key supply routes could have a chain effect on the battlefield and significantly reduce Russia's ability to provide its troops with critical resources. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel.
Moreover, swarms of our long-range drones have driven the occupiers into a phase of total paranoia, feverishly digging up beaches. After the official announcement of a complete logistics lockdown on the peninsula, nerves snapped at the very top. Sergei Lavrov himself had to make hysterical excuses in front of the cameras. How exactly is Crimea being turned into an isolated island with no chance of ammunition supplies? And why has the Kremlin's imperial myth finally collapsed? You'll find out right now. The Kremlin has begun cautiously preparing Russians for the failure of the special military operation. What was considered betrayal and capitulation just yesterday has suddenly started to be presented by Russian propagandists as a quite realistic scenario for the future. And this is a very alarming signal for Moscow. For years, Russians were told fairy tales about inevitable victory, the capture of new territories, and the fulfillment of all set goals. But now even the most loyal voices of Kremlin propaganda are beginning to admit the obvious. Without new waves of mobilization and colossal sacrifices, Russia may simply fail to achieve even those goals it had so ceremoniously declared as its own accomplishments. This creates a rather awkward situation. The territories have already been declared as theirs, but they still haven't managed to reach them. The funniest thing is that the very same propagandists who not long ago demanded to fight until a victorious end are now cautiously testing the waters for a completely different narrative. In the Russian information space, there is a growing number of discussions about freezing the war and stopping hostilities along the front line. In other words, about what Moscow previously called an absolutely unacceptable option. It gives the impression that the Kremlin's TV channels have received a new set of talking points. If previously citizens were being prepared for a great victory, now they are gradually being conditioned to think that unfulfilled objectives are also a victory. As if to say everything was going according to plan, it's just that the plan itself suddenly changed drastically. And if this trend is indeed gaining momentum, it could be a dangerous signal for the Kremlin, because when propaganda starts explaining why defeat is actually a success, it means that somewhere behind the scenes, they already understand perfectly well. Reality has turned out to be much harsher than the fairy tales shown on TV. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are already hot on the occupiers' heels. Real paranoia is beginning in Crimea. The Russians are taking the threat of Ukraine returning to the peninsula so seriously that they are increasingly digging in, building fortifications, and preparing for scenarios that, until recently, they tried not even to mention.
The enemy sees this as a real threat. The Russians are reinforcing areas in Crimea that are vulnerable to amphibious landings, as they consider this quite likely.
For the Kremlin, the situation looks rather awkward. For years, Russian propaganda has been convincing the population that Crimea is supposedly under Moscow's complete and permanent control. But if everything is so calm, then why mine the coastline, build new defensive lines, and feverishly prepare for possible surprises from the sea? It seems that even the occupiers themselves don't really believe their own television tales. However, the Navy emphasizes that such operations are among the most complex in military affairs, and can only be carried out as part of a large-scale offensive campaign.
If necessary, of course, we will carry out any operation required to liberate Ukrainian Crimea.
Particularly telling was his comparison of future challenges to the legendary landing on Omaha Beach during World War II. After all, the occupiers are already turning the Crimean coastline into a continuous obstacle course. And the more effort they put into these fortifications, the louder the main question becomes. If Crimea is truly Russian forever, then why are they defending it as if they are most afraid of losing it? Ukraine is tightening the logistical noose around occupied Crimea more and more. And the Russian command risks facing a problem that cannot be solved by loud statements or yet another propaganda story. Mikhailo Fedorov made a bold statement. Crimea is being isolated by drones, and very soon Crimea will become an island, which could lead to some very unexpected consequences for the Russians. We're no longer talking about isolated strikes, but about a systematic campaign that is gradually destroying the occupiers' military logistics. The most painful thing for Moscow is that the drones are hitting not only specific targets, but the entire army supply system itself. After all, any group of troops can only fight as long as it receives fuel, ammunition, equipment, and reinforcements. And when these routes start dropping out of the game one after another, problems quickly reach even the front lines. The scale is especially telling. According to the minister, in just the first few months of this year, several times more of these drones were contracted than in the entire previous year. And this is only the beginning.
We have announced a logistics lockdown. For the Russians, hell is beginning, one that is very difficult to deal with. And we have this window of opportunity. Logistics are being cut off, Crimea is being isolated, and this is having an impact in the east. There is a direct correlation between how much we strike at logistics and how many assault actions take place on the front line.
It seems that this has seriously affected everyone in the Kremlin. After the loud statements about the isolation of Crimea, the Russian leadership suddenly decided to publicly justify itself. Interestingly, it was Sergei Lavrov himself who had to respond. It seems that this topic turned out to be much more painful for Moscow than they would have liked. Commenting on Mikhailo Fedorov's statement that Crimea could effectively turn into an island due to strikes on logistics, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry said that he didn't quite understand how exactly they planned to do this. However, the very fact that such a reaction appeared is already quite telling, since usually the Kremlin is in no hurry to comment on things it does not consider a serious threat. Lavrov's next statement sounded even more interesting. He assured that they are supposedly already looking for a solution to Ukrainian drones, saying that there is an antidote for any drone. Here a perfectly logical question arises. If the antidote is almost ready, then why do Russian warehouses, bases, airfields, and logistical routes keep making the news regularly? There was also the usual Kremlin arrogance. At the end, Lavrov decided to get personal and said that Fedorov is new to the position, so he still needs to settle in. In reality, it looks rather amusing, because while Moscow is advising the Ukrainian minister to settle in, it is actually Russian officials who are increasingly forced to explain to their own citizens why explosions, fires, and logistical problems are occurring in places that, until just yesterday, were considered absolutely safe. The more actively the Kremlin tries to mock the threat, the stronger the impression that, in reality, it seriously worries them. There they are increasingly coming to understand the unpleasant reality. The war, which they plan to finish in a matter of days, is gradually turning into a struggle for their own logistics, their own rear, and even for the sense of security in territories that just yesterday they called forever Russian. If this trend continues, Moscow's main problem will no longer be how to win, but how to explain to Russians why the promised great victory with each passing month looks more and more like an attempt to save what is still left. But it's not just about Crimea. A colossal blow to the Kremlin's gas stations. Ukraine's recent long-range attacks have put more than 20% of all Russian oil refining capacity out of commission. Analysts have already recognized this fuel crisis as the largest since the start of the full-scale invasion. At Russian gas stations, either there is no gasoline at all, or it is strictly rationed, up to 20 liters per person. All the details of the grand oil collapse in Russia, coming up next.
Russians are losing their nerve. Gasoline in the country, gas stations, have become a luxury. Several regions of Russia are experiencing an acute fuel shortage. There are kilometer-long lines at gas stations. For example, in the Lipetsk region, reports indicate a complete lack of gasoline at some stations. A similar situation is observed in the Yaroslavl region, Stavropol Krai, Tyumen, and Cheboksary, where drivers complain about the shortage of A92, A95, and diesel fuel.
So, what exactly is going on? Are we living in some kind of stone age? We're living in the age of dinosaurs. Why is there no gasoline in Chuvashia? And even if there is, a 92 costs 89 rubles per liter.
Analysts suggest that the latest wave of strikes may have put more than 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity out of commission. The International Energy Agency has called this disruption unprecedented for the entire duration of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. In particular, the fuel problems have hit hardest in regions located near the front line.
The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has already gone, together with the prosecutor's office, to open cases against various gas stations. So, for example, they went to Nefta Magistral and to other independent gas stations that do not have their own oil extraction or refining systems and that buy fuel on the exchange from producers. Accordingly, they simply raised prices above 100, 110, 115 rubles per liter. And now, accordingly, the anti-monopoly authorities have demanded that these prices be lowered, even though there is no fuel.
Problems have started even in places where there weren't any before. For example, in St. Petersburg, Moscow, Voronezh, and Tula. Meanwhile, Russian officials are trying to pretend that everything is fine. The current fuel crisis in Russia may become the most serious since the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. The problems have already affected 53 regions of the aggressor country. At many gas stations, you can buy no more than 20 liters of gasoline and 40 liters of diesel per tank. According to Reuters, due to the growing shortage, Moscow is considering the possibility of purchasing fuel abroad. According to the agency, supplies may be organized from one of the Asian countries. Earlier, Russia had already considered the option of importing by sea. Russia has also purchased fuel from Belarus and Kazakhstan. However, as Reuters sources note, these countries will not be able to provide significant help if the situation continues to worsen.
Oil production in Russia has been declining for the 6th consecutive month, a trend driven by the increasing frequency of Ukrainian drone strikes on the country's energy infrastructure, which disrupt the operation of storage facilities and transport structures necessary to maintain production. According to Bloomberg's calculations based on OPEC data, as a result of this reduction, Russia's oil production is about 690,000 barrels per day below the OPEC plus quota. From an article by the Moscow Times.
Russia will receive less revenue from its oil, but that's not even the worst part for them. If we talk not about the short term, but about the medium term, for the Kremlin, the more frightening issue is what to do with the oil wells. Oil wells operate in such a way that either they run at almost full capacity or they are shut down. If you can't export the oil, and if you can't process it domestically, then what do you do with the oil? There is really no other alternative or choice but to simply shut off the valve located directly at the source of the well.
Long-range sanctions hit Russia's pocket, depriving the Kremlin of funding for its war machine. The day before, Ukrainian defense forces struck the Tyumen oil refinery. This was confirmed by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Tyumen oil refinery processes 9 million tons of oil per year. The plant produces gasoline, diesel fuel, fuel oil, and aviation fuel. It plays an important role in supplying the regions of Western Siberia with fuel. In May, oil production in Russia fell to a yearly low amid intensified Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries. According to Reuters, by the end of May, almost all major oil industry facilities in central Russia were forced to reduce or completely halt operations. Victoria Chistyukina for Freedom TV channel.
And what do you think about these events? Write your thoughts in the comments, give a like, and stay up to date with the main news. There's more to come.